15th day of April 2024. You're doing well on this Monday. I'm going to be your host tonight. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. Call in at 709-589-4406. 789-4406. We got a crazy show tonight, my goodness. The industry's finally lost his mind. We're going to cover the common spent fuel pool. There's a story, believe it or not, and it's the craziest story imaginable about the common spent fuel pool at Fukushima. And basic of the story is they're worried about a landslide behind the common spent fuel pool. And so they got to dig out the hill behind it, because they're worried there's going to be a landslide. Now remember, in behind that, everything is cemented. There's no way there's going to be a landslide there. Lots of pictures to show you. What was really interesting about it, there's quite a lot, and we'll show you that. One of the things in the story was they were talking about it's going to take about 10 years to dig out behind the common spent fuel pool. 10 years. Have you ever heard of a story like that before? Well, you're in luck. And shitface Suga is back at Reactor 3. That's the same picture from when he was the Prime Minister, as far as I can tell. Apparently he was back, and that's the same lapdog behind him. Why are all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? What's up? What's up with that? Surge in airborne radioactive releases have gone on for years at Fukushima and exceeded 25,000 times the normal levels for years and years. Extensive areas are being impacted, and they picked up 30 million one-ton bags. So these are this picture obviously is artificial, like created with artificial intelligence. And we got quite a few of those pictures tonight. Photographer X-ray-like images shows that radioactivity had spread throughout the bodies of wildlife in Fukushima Prefecture. So all the birds and insects and bees and butterflies and moths and everything were shown to be incredibly radioactive. In fact, the worms, the excrement from the worms, 1.4 million atoms per kilogram. And so I was asking artificial intelligence to show me one-ton bags around a nuclear power plant, because you picked up 30 million. So it's hard to comprehend it, what 30 million is. So we were trying to come up with some kind of depiction to articulate the enormity of that statement. Tokyo professor couldn't help but feeling pity for the trees. So it wasn't just the insects and the birds and the bees and the animals and everything. Even the trees, the X-ray-like image shows the spread of radioactivity was the equivalent of miscarriages, stillbirths, congenital malformation. And so you can take this road right here with these one-ton bags and wrap it right around the entire planet and fill it up with those bags. That's how many bags they picked up at Fukushima. And so it's really hard for people to visually comprehend it, because the government is not going to do that for you. The nuclear industry is not going to do that for you. But think about this statement here, radioactive. So cesium from the fallout, this is not just cesium, but cesium in particular remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor. From the surface to the ocean floor of all oceans and all fresh water, cesium is distributed symmetrically throughout it all. It's a catastrophic event for everything with replicating cells. And it's literally the most important story in human history, bar nothing. And we got a total of 18 people on our show and 14 likes. And for a show that I work really hard to dig up the documentation. Then I create all these pictures so there's no way you can misinterpret what we're talking about. Imagine a highway like that wrapped around the entire planet. That was 3% of the land where they picked up 1-ton bags at Fukushima. That would be the animosity equivalent. Think about this statement here. Fukushima radiation is still circling the globe. The levels consistently rise and fall in a 40-day cycle. Here's another way to think about that statement. There's a few ways, but here's a model based on TEPCO and the government's number from Japan of plutonium-239 and based on 20 days of emissions. Well, 20 days after the tsunami, so 15 days of all the reactors had detonated. And this is a plume of plutonium covering the entire planet. And we've done the numbers on Fukushima Reactor 4, for instance. I'm not sure if it was 21,000 pounds of plutonium or 29,000 pounds of plutonium. Was that 2%, right? We've done the numbers on 2%. And every nuclear power plant, this is what it should look like. It should be millions of 1-ton bags picked up because they're hemorrhaging radiation from their fuel pools. And think about the radioactive pollen, because everything is radioactive now worldwide, but Japan is brutal. Up to 2,000 grains of radioactive grains of pollen inhaled in 1 cubic meter of air. So reactor 4 is going to come up quite a bit tonight. This is the 4 sides of reactor 4. Now, the fuel pools are at the very top of the building, so is the reactor core. These are 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story buildings. And what we do here is we desperately try to keep the story alive. It's a brutal job. It's a brutal job. And we also do research expeditions when we're capable. My health have declined dramatically post-Fukushima. Doomsday-like, but we still haven't lost the fire, so to speak. Doomsday-like radiation release, if fire in the pool at Unit 4 would be a global catastrophe. A global catastrophe. I'll show you what that looks like. So if they had a fire, that's reactor 4 over there. If they had a fire and the building blew up and looked like that over there, which is reactor 4, then it would be a global catastrophe. Now, here's our loving medias. This is just a fraction of them, but they're some of the worst scums for sure. Pretending that the building to your left didn't blow up because it would be a global catastrophe, which would be the end of the nuclear industry, right? So the dirty, rotten scoundrels, and I created this picture, 10 years ago or something? And I thought to myself, this is the end of the nuclear industry. And I've been plugging that picture every day, 5 days a week since, for the last decade. And still, I'm the only person showing that picture. And I have the video too, not just pictures, I have actual videos. So this is France's model and study based on 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 in airborne, and based on 20 days covering the planet, but 31 days altogether. Now the model stops at 31, but the plume never goes away. It's a continuous plume. It covers the entire planet. It's a continuous plume. We've never seen nothing like this in our history. We've never heard tell of anything like this in our history. We have nothing to compare this to. It makes Chernobyl look like a paper towel, and Chernobyl is no paper towel. All right, here we go. This is from today, April the 15th. TEPCO to remove a major slope that poses a threat to the nuclear fuel pool. And I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Because we cover this every day, right? So look at the slope here. This is they cemented it all after Fukushima. See, everything is cement. There's no grass, there's no dirt, there's no nothing. Everything is cemented, and at the top of it is joined on, so it's reinforced cement too, right? This is not cheap cement either. This is incredible stuff. Now, that's the common spent fuel pool over right there. Now, they're worried that that slope is going to crumble, it's going to damage the common spent fuel pool. And so they're going to have to remove the slope, large parts of that slope. This is the official, but this is just a cover story is what they're talking about. The building that houses the common spent fuel pool, left foreground over right there, stands against a slope at the Fukushima #1 nuclear power plant. Now the slope wasn't cement right before. After the accident, they cemented it all. And the nuclear industry only uses the best of the best, right? But let's go back to the original first couple of weeks. And the drones were flying over this place and taking high quality pictures. Now, the drone was much higher than this. I'm zoomed in quite a bit. And so there were 736 pictures released in 2021, I believe it was. And we done a presentation then, but we've done another presentation on all of those pictures a couple of weeks ago. You'll find it in my videos. And when you zoomed in on it, you can see that's the reactors up there. There's the line of them. All the pictures were redacted. They were pixelated. But this is the common spent fuel pool. And this is behind, that's that wall we were just looking at. But the common spent fuel pool is completely pixelated. So it's a complicated story if you don't know Fukushima, if you don't know much about nuclear. You probably got zero possibilities of figuring it out on your own. And I understand that, and I'm dedicated to the world having a future. And the only way we can have a future is if we have a conversation. The only way we can have a conversation is if we can make enough noise, if we can get the conversation out there, we can get the common person to start having. There's a lot more smart. Let's face it, I'm not very smart, but there's a lot of smart people out there, incredibly, unbelievably articulated and endearing and indelible people, wonderful, beautiful, well-mannered, well-dressed, and the story will grow because I'm not beautiful, I'm not fancy, I'm not wealthy, I'm not independently able to do anything anymore, right? I'm not some celebrity, I'm not some hockey superstar or soccer star, I'm not some singer, I'm not some fancy Hollywood celebrity, I'm just a nobody. And I've been working hard. Not hard, relentless, unbelievably relentless for 22 years, but for post-Fukushima, I have stuck it in the overdrive in desperation so that we can have a future, and you're going to be denied a future by a single industry, and you're being assassinated through radioactive fallout and radioactive food and radioactive water. And it's on purpose. So this is the common spent fuel pool. Look at it. It's completely redacted. And so when I zoomed in on these pictures that were released, I'm the only person I know on the entire planet that took those pictures and said, hey, there's something strange here. Let's talk about it. But it wasn't just the common spent fuel pool was an abnormality. Reactor 6, when I zoomed in on Reactor 6 from the drone pictures that were released in 2021, which there was no fanfare. It was released, it showed up on the Chinese site. They never announced it. Nobody's ever had a debate about it. We're the only people that ever talked about it. If this is the first time you see it, it's because you came to my site. It's unbelievably important. And the stack over there, the Reactor 6 and the pump house are all redacted. So this is very worrisome because we don't have a reason why this is redacted. And so this is the original site, picture of the site originally after the detonations. And there was another abnormality, and you can kind of see it up there. See that white rectangle up right there? And you can see on both sides of it is significantly pixelated. So we got another abnormality. All it is pixelated, severely pixelated. Now that whole area is built up. Right, and we had a landmark right here, just one of the landmarks. We have other landmarks, and that landmark doesn't exist anymore. And that landmark is right there. And so that spot is this section right here. So there's a common spin, or reactor 6 is right above. That's reactor 5. Reactor 6 is up right there. We have an abnormality right here. That's not explained. We have the common spent fuel pool, which is right here, and reactor, or right here, and we have reactor 4, 5, 3, and 2 are all pixelated right there. Okay, so back to the story. The building that houses the common pool cooling nuclear fuel, which is that building there. Now, the original pictures, everything was redacted for the common spent fuel pool. Tokyo Electric Power Company plans to excavate a massive slope that looms over a pool. It doesn't loom over the pool, so look at the picture. It doesn't loom over the pool. Cooling the nuclear fuel, which is the time of the common spent fuel pool, it's crippled. It's not crippled, it's completely destroyed. And I'll show you reactor 3 and 4. There's 4 reactors and 8 fuel pools were lost, but they refused to acknowledge that and melted down. And they refused to acknowledge that melted down, reactor 4. And they refused to acknowledge the spent fuel pools, and we're going to actually cover all of it. And that's just 2 of the 4 reactors with the same attributes. That's been covered up, and it's the importance of it. You better not deny. So the common pool, where there was 5,197 spent and unused fuel assembly units, which that's not a real number. I'll show you the real number coming up. Were being cooled in the waters as of March. Is expected to hold in for a prolonged period. And unused fuel assemblies. If they're unused, then you don't put them in water. They don't matter. You can go and pick them up. They can't hurt you. They're unused, right? Once they go through a chain reaction, you have to keep them on water. So they're trying to dilute the numbers by introducing diversion of unused fuel assemblies. It's simply not true. You're not going to have that in the water. Being cooled in the water. So it doesn't work that way. The only thing going into water is fuel that has gone through a chain reaction. And now it's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison on top of that, and it's splitting atoms on top of that. TEPCO is expected to move about 100 cubic meters of soil from the slope in approximately a 10-year project. 10-year project. 10-year project. See, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. 10-year, what do you mean 10-year project? What the hell are you talking about? You got any idea how quick they can remove 100,000 cubic meters? 100,000 tons? I mean, cubic meter is basically a ton, right? In an approximately 10-year project. A boring, where they bored in, survey by the utility identified a weak layer that can easily crumble over a wide area within the plant premises. Well, that's simply not true because they have a retaining wall of cement. Right? You can see it clearly. They have a retaining wall of cement. And it's not a threat at all. And the wall is tied in to above it to the roads. So they're tied in. They're not going to, even if they have a significant earthquake, that's not going to be, pieces of the wall might come apart, but it's not going to be like a landslide from a mountain landslide. A geologist and a Nuclear Regulatory Agency commissioner, which means they're a scumbag, said a landslide can occur on the slope in question. You can't have a landslide on that slope, right? You can't have a landslide on it because it's reinforced and it's tied in. It's ridiculous to suggest you're going to have a landslide. And they even provide a picture, which you should immediately, when you see a picture with these people, they're trying to make it look like if any engineers are reading the story, they're going to go to this, so what the hell are they talking about, right? But the Nuclear Regulatory Agency is concerned that if sediment from a landslide flows into the pool, nuclear fuel may not remain cooled, and in the worst case scenario, eventually melt. So then, you wouldn't spend 10 years digging out the back of it. You would just reinforce it. You would just take the cement trucks and spray. You would put down rebar across everything, tie it in again, and then you would just spray it with cement and reinforce it. You wouldn't spend 10 years digging it out. Right? So there's something they're not telling us. But I can tell you what it is fuel assemblies were thrown into that wall, and they buried it with the bulldozers originally, and they cemented it because of the gamma shines and neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the alpha rays, the X-rays. And now they know that in the future they're going to have to deal with it. About 4,000 fuel assembly units being kept in the building that hosts number 1 to number 6 reactors are scheduled to be moved to the common spent fuel pool. And you never see them call it just a common pool. It's usually almost always called a common spent fuel pool by 2031. TEPCO plans to transfer fuel assembly units to a different storage facility within the plant premises after they are sufficiently cooled in the nuclear fuel pool. And the reason they're hot is because they're splitting atoms, and then they're not in no containment, so the atoms are released into the environment up the tall, skinny stacks. So you see that tall, skinny stack? That's where they vent the fuel pools up those stacks. Oh, and the incinerators they have on site. This is an industry that the entire planet should be attacking. The entire planet should be gone to war against the nuclear power plant industries. But the company has been unable to decide when the last fuel assembly unit can be transported out of the common pool, because the common fuel pool melted down. I'll show you again. Okay, so TEPCO plans to complete design work and obtain approval from the excavation project over 1 to 2 years from 2024, dismantle, relocate the steel towers and other obstacles in the next 5 years, remove the soil over about 3 years. So that's the common spent fuel pool up there. Why is it pixelated? We need answers to that. We need TEPCO removed from the site immediately, and we need answers. Why is the common spent fuel pool completely pixelated out? And why did he wait 10 years to release these pictures? And why am I the only person on the planet that acknowledged these pictures? So renewed chain reaction feared at the spent fuel storage pools. So look up the word renewed. It means another, right? And so there was a chain reaction at the spent fuel pool. That would explain why it's pixelated. So it melted down. And so what they want to do is dig deep into the earth where the chain reaction, where the China syndrome is gone, because that building went China syndrome. And that building had an enormous amount. It wasn't 5,000 assemblies. It was actually 6,375 spent fuel assemblies, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, which clearly are monsters. Does the endless evidence prove that Japan and the terrorist International Atomic Energy Agency faked Fukushima Reactor 4 and Reactor 3 fuel pool recoveries? And that is very important, because I'm going to walk you through that and explain that to you coming up. because I'm a sucker for punishment, as everybody that knows this subject are already well aware that I'm a sucker for punishment. Coming back here every night is like a nightmare. It's just a nightmare, and I've been at it for so many years, and nothing has changed. It's still a nightmare. The whole story is just, if it doesn't give you nightmares, you need to revisit the information. It will give you nightmares once you are honest. So the common spent fuel pool is right there. Why is it pixelated? Oh, that's right, because Fukushima radioactive inventory, by the way, is 30 to 40 times as high as Chernobyl. It's much worse than that per building, because each building had decades of reactor cores stored in the top of the two fuel pools. Let me explain that a little bit further, in more detail. So each of the reactor buildings are identical. And there's 4 of them melted, including reactor 4, which even today refuse to acknowledge. And that the spent fuel pool is at the top of the building. There is no top to the buildings. Or bottom to the building, right? And so you're talking about 4 decades of reactor cores in the 2 fuel pools. And the reason there's so much fuel in the fuel pool is because you don't have a repository anywhere on the planet, let alone Japan. And so the chain reaction, a renewed nuclear chain reaction feared at the spent storage pool, and the spent storage pool had 11 million pounds. And they're going to try, and they're even trying to downplay the weight of each assembly, which is, if you're familiar with the subject, won't shock or surprise you. But why is the common spent fuel pool? And that's transport truck containers piled up behind it from the tsunami. And the tsunami ran right through it. It's at the same height. It's right behind reactor 4. And that's reactor 4. It's right behind reactor 4. You can't see it in that picture. But the spent fuel pool could hold 8,300 assemblies. And it did, because it was jam-packed, because you don't have a repository, and you have 6 reactors. And these are not small reactors. These are massive reactors. And because you got nowhere to put them, then they were storing them in top of boat buildings and common spent fuel pool. So it would be like Chernobyl on steroids if the spent fuel catches fire. Each reactor held 3,450 spent fuel assemblies, which is 6 million pounds. Like, not exactly 6 million, but let's use the terms loosely as 6 million. It's much more than that. The common spent fuel pool, now being sprayed with water, contains 6,375 spent fuel assemblies, which each weigh approximately 1,800 pounds. There's 100 fuel rods in assembly, and each rod is 18 pounds, so that's 1,800 pounds. Why was it pixelated? It's such a strange story that it's going to take them 10 years to dig out 100,000 tons, because they're worried about the wall collapsing, when all they got to do is put in more rebar and spray with the truck, spray the cement on it. Is infinitely quicker, infinitely safer, infinitely better, infinitely cheaper, and infinitely more appropriate than a 10-year excavation. That doesn't, it only makes sense if you assume they buried a lot of nuclear waste right behind it during the first year in order to try to regain control of the site. And now they want to recover it, because the water table is going to be incredibly contaminated. And this site has a freshwater aquifer situated underneath it, like most nuclear sites. Fuel being moved, now we're going back to 2019, because you got to give you context, right? I got to try to tell the story, so there's no way that the industry has any wiggle room, and that means very painful amount of work for Dana. Or to be a maniac. pro-nuclear scumbag. Fuel being moved from the crippled Fukushima reactor pool. April 15, 2019. And so now they're claiming that the removal of the 566 nuclear fuel assemblies, which has been kept in the storage pool of the number 3 reactor building, is expected to take 2 years to complete. So this is a ludicrous small amount that we're talking about. The fuel pools are stuffed with decades of reactor cores, at least 3,600 fuel assemblies. Now, reactor 3 is a special one. And so this is reactor, well, there's reactor 3 up there. And that's the reactor core and the 2 fuel pools starting to fall back down to the earth. And that the explosion at the number 3 nuclear plant was felt 25 miles away. So in 2019, they said they were up working in the fuel pool, which that's the building originally over there in the first week or so. The fuel pools were tossed right out of the buildings. And so, right, they were tossed right out of the buildings. And so what they done was they built this contraption. It's built above the site of reactor 3, but it doesn't physically touch reactor 3. This was built off-site, then assembled there. And the whole idea was to manipulate you into thinking that they were in the top of this building. There is no top to the building. These were 19-story, 190-foot buildings. Does this look like a 190-foot building? Because the top of the building is where the fuel pools were towed. That's what I mean. It's almost impossible for, somebody new to this subject to try to sort their way out, right? And so this is the stump of reactor 3. They built this contraption around it. It doesn't physically touch it. And the idea was to support this structure over there and to hoodwink you into thinking that they got the fuel out of the pool, which was 120 feet above the top of the stump that you got there. And if you leveled off the rest of that stump, it should have been leveled off all the way to the ground. But then they couldn't manipulate you, see? So when you look at the original footage, right, you got to concede that the building doesn't exist anymore. And that didn't stop them from... Now, they've done the same thing for reactor 4, but they've done reactor 4 in 2013, 2014. It is Tokyo Electric Power Company, which is not a decommission authority, has no right to be in this position. They're there so you don't blame the appropriate ones like the nuclear industry. They're the scapegoat. First attempt to remove spent fuel from the number 1 through number 3 reactors that melted down during the 2011 nuclear disaster. All fuel assemblies in the number 4 reactor building, which had been shut down at the time of the accident, because you have to shut these things down every 16, 18 months, and you'll take out maybe a third of the fuel out of the reactor core, but you're going to leave the rest there. Right? And then you're going to replace that 1/3. But you're going to leave the rest in it. You're not going to take everything out of the reactor core ever. Unless you're doing a complete rebuild of the site. That takes the plant. That takes about 10 years. They weren't doing that. So this is the official, in this November the 13th, 2013 file photo, members of the media and Tokyo Electric Power Company employees walked down the steps of a fuel handling machine after looking at the spent fuel inside the building housing the Unit 4 reactor. It's an incredible picture, right? The only problem is, they would have to be above the red to look down. And the building doesn't exist more. These are nuclear meltdowns. You're not going in the buildings. They're nuclear meltdowns. That's a no-go zone. That's a death zone. Right? So have a look at this. This is the media pretending they're in reactor 4. This is your loving media pretending that they're way up there on that building over there that doesn't exist in 2013. Reporters were allowed to view the operation from around 8:30 a.m. on monitors installed in the building, and the removal was operated from a control room about 500 meters from the number 3 reactor buildings. So Rupert Winfield Hayes was the only guy who claimed to be inside of both reactors' fuel pools, reactor 4 and reactor 3. And like the whole story is insane, but that doesn't mitigate the fact that we got to deal with it. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's madness. Yeah. Let me see if I can find Rupert Winfield Hayes claiming he's inside. I should be able to find it right away. It just takes a few seconds. Reporters were allowed to view the operation from the number 3 building. Now, Rupert Winfield Hayes is going to claim he's in the building, if I can find it. Got to do it the other way, right? There we go. Okay, I got it. No, we don't. Almost here, bear with me. Yeah, here we go. Rupert Winfield Hayes, reactor 4. So that's, now you're looking at reactor 4. I'm going to put my headphones on. Maybe. Yeehaw! That was a little scary that time. I'm going to adjust the volume for you on my side, so just bear with me when it's happening. Like this. Perfect.
This is very strange to be standing inside here, because this huge structure I'm standing inside is right on top of reactor building number 3.
Okay, now let me show you that one more time. Because this is not strange, this is criminal. It's a criminal. So he's claiming he's way above this wreckage in the middle of nowhere in an invisible fuel pool.
And down underneath me here is the melted reactor core inside this building.
And reactor 3 was the plutonium mixed oxide fuel site. And this is stuff that's already gone through a chain reaction, went through a chain reaction again.
Over the top here they have built a shield to lower the radiation level so that we can come up here. So
it doesn't work that way, right? Again, the fuel pool doesn't exist. So even if you built a shield, you still don't come up there.
the workers can come up here to construct this, but radiation levels are still very high here. And because of that, we can only spend a few minutes here.
Let's go back 1 second. See his eyes? See the reflection? Just bear with me. Let me zoom in on that. Let me do some little magic right here. Hang on. I'll adjust it. I never noticed that before. I'm going to move back the picture back a little bit. But that don't look like a fuel pool building in his eyes, does it? At all. Let me see if we can spot something there. I got higher quality footage. I'm going to dig it up. And if not, I'm going to go down and load the video again and zoom in on these eyes. I'm going to play it.
Because of that, we can only spend a few minutes here. Now, if you come over here, there's my alarm going off. This is the spent fuel pool. Down inside here, more than 560 spent fuel assemblies.
There was actually 3,600 assemblies in each fuel building. So Rupert Winfield Hayes is under no way is he in the fuel pool of Reactor 3 because we know he's not, because Reactor 3 fuel pool doesn't exist. It simply doesn't exist. So now they're saying each spent nuclear fuel assembly is 12 they're actually 12 feet long, right? The assembly is a bit longer. 4.5 meters long and weighs 250 kilograms, but that's simply not true. Right? They're always like chipping away at the numbers, and we've been doing this for 13 years. It's like originally it was 500,000 people evacuated. Now they say it's 37 or something, 37,000. They kept chipping away, right, in increments over the years. So barely anybody's paying attention. So first off, like each assembly has 100 fuel rods in it. Each rod is 12 feet long, and each rod weighs 18 pounds. And because they've been stacking, they don't have a repository to store anything, each assembly is stuffed. And they removed the restrictions about how close they can put these assemblies in order to be able to store more in the fuel pools, right? This is one of their old scary tricks that they're doing. And it doesn't weigh 520 kilograms. It weighs, which is 250 kilograms, which is over 500 or 5,500 pounds, or whatever, or 550 pounds. They actually weigh 1,800 pounds. And after nuclear fuel assembly was lifted, it was transferred to a special transport container which weighs around 50,000 pounds that can hold up to 7 assemblies in, and they're it's done underwater. And there is no building, there is no fuel pool. You're not doing anything underwater because there's no fuel pool. The container will then be carried out of the reactor building by a crane and lowered about 30 meters. So they're saying right there is 100 meters tall. So they're saying that that truck there is 100 feet tall, or 30 meters tall, is almost 100 feet tall. That's what they're saying, right? To a trailer at the ground level, temporary storage in a common pool nearby. So normally in these buildings, there's an elevator. It's not an elevator shaft, but what's described as an elevator shaft. So it's just a shaft where they take these 50-ton cast and they lower them down, and then there's a special truck with an enormous amount of wheels on it. Let me see if I can find a depiction of it, actually. To say I despise these people doesn't really do it justice. To say I have unbelievable contempt for them still doesn't seem to do it justice. They're truly, they're truly a curse on humanity, these people. Now here's Rupert Winfield Hayes claiming he's inside a Fukushima Reactor 4 fuel pool. Let me play that.
So this is really why we've been brought here. Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge
and reactor, so he faked reactor, he'd done it for reactor 4, and this is the BBC, but Rupert Winfield Hayes in particular wasn't the only one, but he's the only one to pretend he was in the fuel pool of reactor 3 and pretend that he was in the fuel pool of reactor 3 and 4. So there's the fuel pools are at the top of the buildings. The unprecedented operation expected to meet with various difficulties due to the repeated problems with the crane and other equipment installed at the number 3 reactor building. But there is nothing installed. You can't physically do something there. The fallout in the United States and Washington, for instance, of the Xenon-133, which burns a hole through your lung, ends up in your bone, mutates your stem cells, particularly your children and birds and insects, and ends up in your skeleton, right? It was 450,000 times above detection levels. These are numbers, and persisted for weeks. So this is enough to saturate all the species in the biosystem, the ecosystem. Radiation dose in the northwest and the Great Lakes was equal to the west coast, and the west coast was brutal. So interior, the Great Lakes, right, your biggest aquifers in the northern hemisphere, have been permanently compromised. And I know Richard wanted me to make a picture of kids with extra arms and legs. And I'm sorry, Richard, it was late at night. I happened to see your comment. And I just never made it enough pictures. Right? But we got one picture for you anyway. I'll get it. I'll get there, man. Trust me, I'll get there. All spent fuel finally removed from reactor at Fukushima plant. Now, this is still reactor 3 they're talking about. Apparently, that up right there is 190 feet in the air. Hazard work to remove all the spent nuclear fuel from reactor storage pool at the crippled. Again, when they call it crippled, everybody in the nuclear industry should be crippled. And then put in jail for the rest of their natural lives. Was finally completed on February 28. Now, we covered this extensively back then, right? It marked the first time any of the storage pools at the 3, because they refused to count reactor 4, to be emptied out, and came less than 2 weeks before the 10th anniversary of the triple. It was 4 meltdowns. 8 fuel pools melted down also. The 2-year effort involved removal. Again, they're saying 566 spent fuel units left in the pool number 3. Like, what are you talking about? There's reactor 3. The spent fuel pools are at the very top of the building. Those 2 pictures up there are the official pictures, but they're simply not real. Completion of removal work at number 3 reactor building severely damaged by a hydrogen explosion. The hydrogen, these are not severely damaged. The explosion was felt 25 miles away. Like, this is reactor 3. Well, it was. That's reactor 1 detonating. That was brutal enough. Remember, the building is 19 stories, 190 feet. So how far up did it throw the fuel assemblies and the fuel rods now? So this is the official picture at the top of a building that don't exist. Posing a danger due to fears of another powerful earthquake damaging the structure and jeopardizing TEPCO's ability to cool them. Again, this is reactor 3. Does that look like it's 190 feet tall? Does that look like a 65-meter building? Does that look like a 19-story building? Because when you skin that out with the remote control cranes and everything, and this is what was left. And the idea was to put a contraption on it and pretend they were in the spent fuel pool. Needs to be kept cool as it emits high levels of radiation. Utility plan to move the spent fuel from number 3 reactor to a shared pool, a common spent fuel pool, on the storage to ensure the spent fuel can be safely managed. But there is no spent fuel pool because it went kabooey. The removal work got underway in April 2019. We covered that every day after rubble and other debris were cleared away. A special crane with a special idiot in charge with a robotic arm was used to lift the spent fuel. Operators worked remotely during the removal process from an operational center 500 meters away because of high radiation readings inside the buildings. Rupert Winfield Hayes was magically transported there by a special machine, I guess, because of high radiation readings inside the radiation building. Well, the building doesn't exist. There's the building up there. This is not up for debate. The work was marred by a flurry of malfunctions in the equipment, and the crane soon got the project started. The challenge was further complicated by rubble and debris in the pool that distorted the handles of some of the spent fuel units. And during the last stretch, Arnie Gunnarsson used to say like a crushed pack of sugar. And if one of them touches each other, says boom, and it's all over, right? Piece of the traitor. During the last stretch of the removal work, operators picked up the pace by working in shifts around the clock, Dana. Like, what are you talking about? The buildings were ejected, the fuel pools and the reactor cores. It was known as an excursion. The removal of the spent fuel from the number 4 reactor building was completed in 2014. So this is reactor 4. That's all 4 sides of it. Think of a 19-story apartment building, or a 65-meter apartment building, or a 190-foot apartment building. And you own it. It's yours. Your baby. That's your baby. And you're on vacation, and you get a text message from one of your employees going, "Hey, boss, we had a little event here," and you say, "Well, send me some pictures." And they send you those 4 pictures. That's all 4 sides of your apartment building. Are you going to say, "Well, slap some gyprock up on it and get it back up and running"? But remember, this is a nuclear meltdown. This is decades of reactor cores that detonated also. And so the population of the planet doesn't understand the danger, the unbelievable danger eating and drinking has now become because of this nightmare, this unbelievable nightmare. And everybody has turned their back on us. Everybody's turned their back on us. And no matter what, I still got to get up and go to war every day, no matter what. Even if nobody watches the video, there's no way I can't come here and try every night. I got to, my idea was, I can create 1 million little bastards just like me, right? Educate you, and you can't be fooled anymore, right? And there's no one going to win an argument. If you're here regular, even for like 30 days, nobody is going to beat you in a conversation about Fukushima. And I mean nobody. You are well armed. And so they can assassinate me all they want, but they can't get rid of all of us. That was the idea, right? Excuse me for the slurp. With regards to the number 2 reactor, which went in meltdown, like, you don't give it the prominence that it deserves, the respect, which went into a meltdown. Like the average person, if you say that to him, that means nothing to him. It means nothing to him. A combined 1,000 spent fuel units, which is now I don't know if I've ever heard them refer to it as units instead of assemblies, remain in the storage pools. Well, there's nothing left in the storage pools of reactor 1 and 2. I'll show you that coming up shortly. TEPCO is aiming at starting removal work of the 2 reactors in 2024 or beyond. And apart from the spent fuel, 800 to 900 tons of melted fuel, nuclear fuel remains in number 1 through number 3 reactors. And this is a picture that they show us, and they want you to believe that this is reactor 1 and 2, rather. Okay. Broken. So let's go back to 2021. There was an earthquake, right? March the 13th, I believe it was. I can't remember. Broken device of Fukushima plant failed to record a vital quake data. Now look at that picture there. Ain't that interesting? 2 broken seismometers, which is measuring the earthquake in the buildings, that the crippled, and calling these things crippled should be a crime on its own. Does that look like it's crippled, anybody? Failed to record data from powerful earthquake on February the 13th. I'm sorry, not March the 13th, but February the 13th. According to TEPCO, which shouldn't exist. Right? They were nationalized right away. They became aware last year that the seismometers installed at the number 3 reactor buildings. Again, this was meant to make you think that they were doing stuff at number 3, see? We're on the blink but didn't repair them, the company officials told a meeting at the Nuclear Regulation Authority on February 22nd. One was placed on the top floor. So let's look at the building. The top floor is about 120 feet above the stump there. So unless it's invisible, then like this industry is insane. Making up stories like this is the definition of insane. And when all your governments and all your universities and all your medias are participating in these lies, then you're in real trouble. They're not doing this because they're bored. They're doing this because the adverse effects from it are catastrophic to your health. Like heart attacks, enlarged hearts, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, even Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia are very well known adverse side effects from radiation poisoning. Now, the seismometers at the number 3 reactor buildings were not required under law or regulations, but under the goodness of the nuclear industry, they put them up there at the top of the building that no longer exist. Right, so they give themselves some artificial credit because a certain percentage is going to believe that narrative. But there is no top to the buildings because the building went kabooey. I mentioned that earlier, I think, didn't I? Kabooey? No, kablooey, that's right. I know, it's confusing. The Nuclear Non-Regulatory Agency / Nuclear Regulatory Authority plans to call on TEPCO to report on how it will deal with the issue. Because nuclear regulatory is not going near it. It will also consider requiring the company to properly manage and maintain seismometers. So we're going to make it mandatory to put seismometers at the top of a building that no longer exists. We surely live in Orwellian times, right? Now, the February 13th earthquake registered an upper 6 on the Japanese seismic intensity scale of 7 in Fukushima. It's called a Shindu scale. And so you take 7 divided into 10, and you got 1.428. You take the 1.428, multiply it by an upper 6, and their scales are 1, 1.52, 2.5, 3, 3.5, all the way to 7. So an upper 6, let's say it's a 6.5. It's higher than that, but it's a 6.5. You multiply by 1.428, and you get a 9.3, 9.28. And so then they cooked up this story that they had seismometers at the top of the buildings, but they didn't register it, but the buildings were okay. When the buildings really doesn't even exist, to cover up all the damage. And it was during this earthquake, there was 5,500 schools that filed for compensation or insurance claims because of damage to the schools in Fukushima and surrounding prefectures. The train tracks, the high-speed train tracks, was torn apart in 1,009 places. Right, the February 13th earthquake in 2021. We know this stuff because we've been covering this for so long, right? So TEPCO said the following day that the cooling water had overflowed from the pools storing spent nuclear fuel at Fukushima number 1 and number 2 nuclear power reactors due to the tremor, which is not what you call an earthquake, by the way. And the overflow, totaling 3 liters, was wiped off. So now they're saying somebody went up to the spent fuel pools in reactor 1 and 2 and with a cloth and wiped up the water that spilled out. This is not water because the fuel is still splitting atoms. Like, okay, so a reactor core splits atoms, and the atoms heats water, boils the water rather, and the water drives a turbine, and then that turbine powers 1 million homes and businesses. So I like to always say, like, how many atoms does it take to boil enough water for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? Like the numbers are astronomical, we're talking about. And a single atom is brutal to a human or a bird or an insect or a mammal or an animal or a child or bacteria or fungus or whatever. Anything with replicating cells. So how many atoms do you got to produce to boil water to turn turbines to power 1 million homes and businesses? These numbers are off the chart numbers. These are numbers that we don't even have a name for. And when you take the fuel out and put it into the pool, it's still producing those, it's still splitting those atoms. It's not under pressure anymore, but it's still boiling off 120,000 liters, and each liter is going to be incredibly saturated. So there's zero possibility you're going to go up and wipe it off. And an earthquake, by the way, even if there was fuel pools there, and the earthquake was rocking the building enough that it did spill water, because the water is very below the surface of the top of the pool, for instance. Not below the surface, but very down into the pool. These are very deep pools. The building would probably crack in two in order for it to accomplish that enormous feat. But the problem with the story is there is no reactor 4, there is no reactor 3, there is no reactor 2, and there is no reactor 1. And just because they claim that they're in the fuel pool, I'm not going to play, well, I'll play the video for you. Because you got to hear it to really comprehend it. And I typically play this every day or 2 days, this video. And I put this whole thing together at least 10 years ago. And here we are today, we're still talking about it. It's just surreal, right?
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
Okay. All right. Hold on. So we got a question asking, what's the worst that could happen if a plant totally exploded and it lost just a single plant and it lost all of its inventory? What's the worst scenario, worst case scenario from that? I can show it to you, actually. Sadly. Let me show that to you. Okay, so here we go. Bear with me. So I launched research expeditions for 6 years from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And these were very difficult times. And I went for 4 to 5 months at a time without coming home. And we done species counts. One end of the coastline to the other. Due to the radioactive fallout, this is just 19.5 days of radioactive fallout right here. The entire planet is covered in radioactive fallout. The most vulnerable species is the nursery. And here's what happened. So the species to your left, the 7,000 highly visible species, are exterminated. That's what a plant can do. So imagine multiple plants detonating. So the species to your left, you'll never take those pictures again. They're exterminated. The species to the left no longer exists. And I went back year after year to see if they came back, if they recovered. So normally the ocean is a soup of life. Incredible diversity. This is a tropical rainforest in British Columbia coastlines. And I left no stones unturned. I went year after year after year. I hit this from every angle that you can conceive. It's hard to appreciate it. When was the last time we watched this whole video? Let's watch this whole video. When was the last time that we watched this whole video? So I'm controlling a drone flying. And I'm also controlling the drone in the water. That's something anybody should be trying. You should have a couple of people doing all of this, right? Oh, the video's cut off, so it don't matter. So after 6 years of plying that coastline, the species to your left are officially exterminated. They're never coming back. And that's due to the perpetual radioactive fallout from Japan, right? So the reason that they're pretending they're in these buildings because they don't want the nuclear industry to get blamed for that extinction level event, see? Is nuclear industry worth killing all of those species? Is the nuclear industry worth killing all these wonderful, amazing species? Is that a fair trade-off? Well, look, the media doesn't care. The media will, which is not really media, they're just degenerates, have sold us a wolf ticket. TEPCO also said February 19 that the contaminated water leaked from the containment vessels in number 1 and number 2 reactor. Explosion at Fukushima can only have been caused by a meltdown of the reactor core, which is the containment. Worse than a meltdown, too, the spent nuclear fuel catches fire. That's the New York Times. And the nuclear engineer, far more radioactivity inside the spent fuel ponds than in the reactors could very well produce damage greater than Chernobyl. But each reactor is equal to about 100 Chernobyls, because Chernobyl was a graphite reactor. And these are pure uranium, pure plutonium. So Darcy, there's your hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical because it happened. It's real. It's not a game. This is not imaginary. This is not... Look, you know, if I was wrong, the industry would just come out and beat the daylights out of me, right? They can't challenge my narrative. And the reason is because I'm honest. I'm 100% honest 100% of the times, which is why this is such a hard job. Because you gotta be honest 100% of the times. And so we covered the entire planet. Right? We covered the entire planet with radioactive fallout. The entire planet. It's hard to comprehend how much radiation we're talking about got out of these buildings. Well, it's probably impossible for the average person to even begin to comprehend the nuclear industry. Every nuclear power plant should be surrounded by billions of one-ton bags from the fallout from the fuel pools. It doesn't just stop locally, it covers the whole planet. Started removing radioactive fuel rods from the fuel storage pool of one of the 3 reactors that melted down in 2011, which is simply not true. Many fuel rods batched into assemblies. There's 100 fuel rods in each assembly. So it's not fuel rods batched into assemblies. The assemblies are 100 fuel rods. Are stored in storage pools within the reactor buildings. And this is the official picture of Reactor 3, and that's the official picture of Reactor 3. And Reactor 3 was a plutonium mixed oxide facility, which means they're lying. See, there's zero possibilities that they're looking at a fuel pool of a building that no longer existed on day 6. These pools could be seriously damaged if the plant is hit by another big earthquake or a tsunami. So moving the spent fuel from these pools to the safety of the common pool within the premise is an important step to preventing accidents. Again, you know, if you're just joining the show recently, you got to go back to the beginning of it to get the full context of nuclear, of the story. All 1,535 nuclear fuel assemblies that were in number 4 building, which did not melt down. Now, Arnie Gunnarsson made the assemblies for the fuel pools. Or he made the racks.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Right, so they got 70 reactors in the United States that are exactly identical in every sense to Fukushima's reactors. Arnie made the racks, worked for a company that made the racks that took the assemblies, which are 1,800 pounds, got 100 fuel rods that are 18 pounds each.
And Unit 4 has always been my biggest concern.
That's reactor 4.
If you watched our website, on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
So this is reactor 4 in 2012, 2013. So he said if that happens, you have to evacuate Tokyo. And so he's a public relation firm. Now his wife, Maggie Gunnarsson, my mistake. She was the spokesperson for the nuclear industry, a pro-nuclear spokesperson. That's his wife. And so what they are, they're an assassination team upon humanity, those two. Was removed by the end of 2014 since workers could enter the building. But you can't, these are the alleged workers. You can't, and the workers are talking about, by the way, are the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language. Nobody's entering the building when the building doesn't exist anymore. That's reactor 4. So saying that since the workers can enter the building, when you look at the building before they tore it apart with remote control cranes and killed who knows how many homeless people, there's nothing left, right? Since workers could enter the building, the operation was conducted in a normal manner. So they're saying they entered the fuel pools on top of a building that don't exist and worked in a normal manner and removed 1,500 fuel assemblies when there was actually 3,650 assemblies in each of the buildings. The industry is actually insane. The nuclear industry is now claiming, by the way, as of July the 13th, 2023, that none of this happened, that everything I'm showing you never happened. Despite their stories, now they're claiming these stories are never ever happened either. By contrast, areas around the fuel storage pool for number 3 reactor remain inaccessible due to the high levels of radiation, and that the situation requiring the removal operation be remotely conducted from a control room 500 meters away. Well, the building detonated. Try that again. The building detonated. They built this off-site and brought it in and stacked it on top of this, whatever you want to call that. That should have been razed all the way to the ground. There's nothing left of reactor 3. They've done that for both of these reactors where they put these contraptions on top of it and then pretended they were in the fuel pool. And so what we do is we go through this typically 5 days a week. And the idea is to keep the story alive. And so anybody new from the industry, investors or policymakers, they say, wait a second, that's a recent video. Why are they still talking about this? And when they come watch the video, they're like, bam, got him, right? Bam, I hit him again, right? Bam, got him again. So you keep this story alive, and if nothing else, you destroy the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry is very powerful. They got a lot of money, and they're going to be out there with all kinds of propaganda. But the propaganda doesn't work when the truth exists, right? Like if I don't exist, then it's only the propaganda. And there really would be a nuclear renaissance if I wasn't around, because there would be no alternative narrative, right? And so the investors, the policymakers, they're stuck with the pro-crazy nuclear, the nut jobs. They're still in their own time going to seek out alternative versions of Fukushima. And what are they going to find? They got no choice. They're going to find me. They're not going to admit it. Nobody's going to admit it. But I'm actually a good guy. I'm a very dedicated and very honest and very hardworking. I'm relentless in pursuit of it. I spent 6 years doing research expeditions. And it shows an extinction event. And I can't switch that off. I can't close my eyes and escape that. You had to experience it to appreciate what I'm saying to you, maybe. But because I knew the coastline before, and I can't switch. I went back for 5 more years to see if the species recovered, and they didn't. Now we're seeing the same thing in the Atlantic, but we're seeing it symmetrically throughout the ecosystem. And then if you go back through my videos, you'll see I do die-off videos where I cover topics that we're able to link. Hey, we got James calling in. Good stuff, man. Hey, we got James. Hi, James. Hello.
Machida Machada.
Oh, you're supposed to say, hello, Mr. Dana.
We're calm down, Charlie. Like, you know, he's still stuck in the debris, I think.
Calm down, Charlie. Go ahead, James. I'm sorry. I'll keep chatting if I don't show.
I'm just kind of worried about him, you know. He's stuck there in the debris, you know. Just
He was up there in Reactor 3 with Rupert Winfield Hayes a bit.
Exactly. But, you know, another point about the fact that you're really the only voice out there. I mean, I seem to remember that you told us all, and I'm just still, like, amazed by all this, but you're cancer-free?
Cancer-free, yeah.
That's so fucking amazing,
so
Dave.
fucking,
It's so amazing. Like,
it's hard to comprehend it. I've done a half a gram twice a day of DCA, and I also hit it with chlorine dioxide, about 20 drops a day. And a lot of vitamin D, liquid vitamin D in my water too. Yeah, go ahead, James. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. It's just overwhelming. It's just like that has to be another sign. I mean, it just has to be.
Oh, it is.
I mean,
I feel that too, eh? You know, I was stunned by it, really, right? I felt, you know, I done the things I'm supposed to do too, right? Like I stayed away from radiation, stayed away from chemotherapy, stayed away from the death beams that they give you in the hospital. That helps.
Well, you know, what didn't help was you being on the front line on those expeditions. You know, all the gamma rays you sucked up from that. I mean, that's the whole thing here.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the only thing left on the beach was gamma rays and betas and alphas and neutrons. Right. Yeah, great point, by the way. Yeah. Yeah, still going.
You know.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add that I recall from the previous night we had, you know, Sacramento Lynn was on the chat and she was telling us that she was, you know, just somewhere in the north coast of California and how they banned the salmon fishing. There was like signs out. I think that's what I recalled. But
yeah,
just how
they banned salmon.
It's diminishing. It's all diminished.
All the crabs are gone in Alaska. 10 billion crabs are missing. It's like crazy. So, that's crazy.
I said, and it's just, it's just amazing that you know, there might be 20-something people watching you right now, but we know that hundreds of people buy the Calm Down Charlie shirt, so this has to get out there. I mean, I'm sure like most of those shirts are being sent off world. You know, like, you think about it. Like,
yeah. Oh no, the irony. See, it's there's a lot of people out there that we don't realize, right? The irony is real. You know,
right.
Yeah. No, there is people. Well, YouTube got me censored, and so the numbers are very. I've been here for so long, it's impossible for me only to have a handful of people watching my shows. It's impossible, right?
It just means that YouTube must be making a lot of money censoring you, so that's why they keep you here. It's got to be that. Yeah,
they, well, we got examples from the media of the censorship from like Twitter and that, right? It's an enormous amount of money being paid by the Japanese government to censor platforms, right? And they got different ways of doing it. And like you say, they took down my other site with 15 or almost 1,600 presentations on it when we were looking for spiders in the middle of nowhere. And we were reporting live from those 400 miles out in the woods, reporting live that spiders were all gone. When I got up the next morning to do an update, my site was gone. No strikes, no nothing. They just jacked my site. And
well, it's like how Kissinger would tell, Nixon to remind him, like how the military they're just useful idiots.
Yeah.
Well, to YouTube, you're just a useful content producer, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's how they see it, right? Like, all right, well, you're useful to them in a way that they get money to moderate the hell out of you, you know, because if there was policymakers watching this, I mean, just imagine
Yeah.
the change that would be overnight. They'd be like, wait, nuclear power plants, they need external power plants to operate, coal, gas, what are you talking about? They can't operate on their own power? How come nobody's told me this? But Dana,
It's left out of the conversation everywhere. We have a couple of examples where it was mentioned, but they probably got it from my shows, right? Because the industry, you won't find it at the NRC site. You won't find it at the International Atomic Energy Agency site. You're not going to find it at ERPA or Orangeclear or the IPRC. They're not going to put that in the conversation because you got two external power supplies, large, coal, gas, or oil. If you take two of them, get rid of the nuclear, you're producing as much power as a nuclear plant. So what's going on here? Right?
What does it take to like, you know, energize the power for the spent fuel pool facility?
It's mad. It's crazy on its own. Yeah. Well,
it's negative power at that point. Yeah, you're negative net zero at this, but you're divide by zero. That's what you're doing.
And it's the most resource-intensive industry in history, and nothing else compares to it. It's probably more resource-intensive than all other industries combined. It's about the fuel cycle, and it's about the plutonium, and it's about the bombs. So once the fuel goes through the cycle, now it's a breeder fuel. It's making plutonium perpetually, splitting atoms, and some of them are plutonium. And so they collect that for bombs, right? And so that's what nuclear is actually all about. And energy is a byproduct of it. And then they decide to use that to bludgeon us into keeping it running under the auspice that it has some redeeming qualities when it has none whatsoever, nothing.
A forever blackmail on humanity and all the species of the world. Yeah.
Oh, it's a nightmare. And our biggest...
That's what I wanted to call about, Dana. I mean,
Yeah, I know. I appreciate it, actually. This is fantastic. It breaks up the night because I'm struggling tonight. Just for some reason, anyway.
I'll definitely send a PayPal, I swear. You know, thank you so much. I mean,
oh yeah, no.
I mean,
thank you, my friend.
If it wasn't for you, I don't know what we'd do without you. I mean, really. I mean, so many people care. I mean, we can tell that from the Calm Down Charlie shirts alone.
Yeah. I don't know what the new number is. I think it's 277 or something. I can't.
It's a victory.
When we get to 300, I'm going to have a special shirt made up, I think. Try it again, right?
Okay, Dana. All right. I'll
Okay. God bless. Okay, but love you, buddy. Yeah, thank you, James. That's James Lucid, folks. If you're not familiar with James, a massive supporter for a very, very long time, and unbelievably articulate too, right? And definitely knows what's up. Has no illusions. And at this point, after all these years, right, you know, this is what I mean. There's so many people out there at this stage that are unbelievably articulated, and that if you ever set a fire under them, you're going to get another Dana on your hands. And just one Dana on the nuclear industry is enough to destroy this industry. Imagine hundreds or even thousands of Danas. Like, and what I mean, but I shouldn't use that connotation, but thousands of people that are articulated on this topic and are not going to be manipulated, are not going to be deceived, are not going to be coerced. That's the industry can't even handle me. They have dragged me into court multiple times and gave me gag orders for the extent of the limits in order to protect some of their assets. They've hit me with slap suits. They've bankrupted me repeatedly, and I just keep coming back because I can't switch off the research expeditions, right? I can't escape that reality. I think the species deserve the prominence. They deserve a voice. They deserve to be protected, and then those who have destroyed that incredible, inconceivable, unimaginable diversity should be held accountable. And that's what we work to. We do it by educating the population, because I can't go after them. If I had several $1 million, if I was like being funded by a big organization, had a couple of $1 million to work with, I could kill the nuclear industry. I already got it wrecked, but I can finish it off spectacularly. And the problem is, it's because that's what makes me me, is that's what I want. It deserves that and so much more. We'll never hold them all accountable. You would have to jail every journalist. You'll have to jail every professor in the nuclear industry. You have to jail every nuclear academic because they remain silent, which is just unbearable. It's an unbearable facet of reality that the world sat in silence and let this happen, and participated in the cover-up to the point where they dug their own graves. And let me give you a couple of examples of that, what I mean by that. So every nuclear scientist, including scumbag Arnie Gunnarsson and his wife, who was the pro-nuclear spokesperson, knew the fuel pool was gone, knew the reactor cores were gone. So both him and his wife should be in jail for the rest of their natural lives, because they went around the country doing presentations and lectures saying it wasn't gone, saying it wasn't hacked. That should not be legal, but it is illegal. It's legal to do what they're doing. It's not illegal to poison you with the radiation, because the Congress, parliaments, diets don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you. Only the nuclear regulatory administrators, which are appointed by presidents and prime ministers for their what's the word? No, my brain gone flat on me. So they're there for 4 years, right? So they pick their own regulatory agency members, and there's no way they're going to make it illegal. And then the next administration can reverse. Say if they did make it illegal to poison you, the next administration could appeal it and then make it not illegal to poison you. Because when your politicians, your governments, your communities don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you, but yet you have the authority to make it illegal to poison you for 3,000 chemicals. They have the authority to put labels on all the bags for poison in the foods, but they don't have the authority to make it illegal to kill you with radiation and poison you with radiation. How the hell did we ever get to that stage? How could we be that naive to allow something like that to happen to us, when there's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger to defend against anthropogenic man-made radiation? So even the most vulnerable, like the bacteria, the fungus, everything, the phytoplankton, the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain, the single-celled animals still don't have an autoimmune trigger like us to defend against it. So they're going to get wiped out. And they're the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain. If they get wiped out right away, it takes 10, 20 years, but the food chain is now broken and you can't repair it. And so you start noticing all the whales are emaciated. You start noticing all the birds showing up emaciated. And this is what we documented. And we hunt these stories. And I mean, the next die-off video that I does over the next week or so is another horrifying slap in the side of the head of reality. Let me try to finish this out anyway, because we only got a little way to go and we'll be finished. I never dreamt that I would make it this far tonight because I'm so burnt out. But I understand right deep inside of me, there's nothing I can do about this. I have to show up as often as I can, no matter how much how miserable it is, no matter how tired I am, no matter how worn out, no matter how many times I told the story. I still got to get here and do my best, because I won't sleep tonight if I don't. The only way I'm going to sleep tonight, and I'll sleep like a baby tonight, is if I come here and do this in this is desperation. There's no fun, and there's no, like, it's a terrible story, you see. Initially, the process of removing the fuel rods from the storage pool number 3 reactor was scheduled to start in 2014. These are maniacs, right? And let me remind you what reactor 3 looked like right away. The fuel pools are up there at the top of the buildings, and this is the reactor core. It's also at the top of the building. Reactor 3, which was a plutonium mixed oxide facility, is completely gone. And so to suggest there was only 566 nuclear fuel assemblies in the storage pools, and I showed you that each reactor core has 3,600, or each building was easily able to contain at least 3,650 assemblies. And the reason that there's a lot more than that there is because they don't have a repository, so they have nowhere to store it, only in the fuel pools, which means the fuel pools 40 years later would have been saturated with much more. So to come out and say there's 566 assemblies, it's hard to comprehend how angry I am with these people about that. These are the lowest forms of life, and that's how I refer to them and treat them. These are degenerate scum. And I'm not going to sugarcoat my opinion of these. These are terrorists, right? These are wicked terrorists. These are sadistic. These are thieves. They are stealing your future. These are good-for-nothing scum, right? These should be held accountable for the rest of their lives. They should be jailed for the rest of their natural lives. And all their wealth should be taken away from their families. Their families should be sent to work at Fukushima as a deterrent for future nuclear industries, that they don't do the same crimes against humanity and the 8 million species. Experience and expertise to be accumulated through the work with the number 3 reactor will come in handy for the same fuel removal work with number 1 and number 2 reactors. Well, like just the stacks, which are the skinny stacks, quite a ways away from the buildings, the reactor cores, the reactor buildings, are lethal doses just running past them, not walking past them because you won't survive that. If you run it past them, you'll die a few days later instead of that day. It was actually 25 sieverts at the base. Unit 2, by the way, completely liquefied. It was 100% liquefaction of the uranium core, which meant it was burning at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And we don't have anything that can contain that. That's gone deep into the earth. In Unit 2, and the fuel pool. We've never seen this before in the history of nuclear power. But here they are claiming that they're going to get the fuel out of reactor 1 and 2 buildings. So the 2 other reactors, however, will pose an even tougher challenge. The debris situation number 1 reactor building is worse. This blew up and they ejected the fuel pool from reactor 1. And I showed you a picture rather, of those explosions earlier from reactor 1 and reactor 3. It was a double picture, and I do believe we showed it twice. Let me see if I can. Here's reactor 1 coming up any moment. So that was the fuel pool detonating. Remember, the buildings are 190 feet tall, 65 meters, 19 stories. Number 3 reactor, experience and expertise to be accumulated through the work with number 3 reactor will come in handy for the fuel remover number 1, 2 reactors. Again, this is a total fantasy that the fuel remains. It is vital to obtain sufficient experience and know-how through the process of removing fuel from the rods. Horrific scum, right? Horrific liars, horrific degenerates. No decision has yet been made as to what to do with the spent fuel after being transferred to the common pool. And this is complicated and a knotty issue that does not lend itself to an easy, quick solution. Just like the problem of a rapidly increasing amount of radiation-contaminated water. The plant is generating as the reactors are being flooded to cool the melted fuel debris, and underground water keeps flowing in the reactor buildings. So they like to give you some truth, right? Because then when they learn a bit of truth, then it gets explained away, right? But the buildings don't, the inventories are long gone, and there is inventory left inside of it, but 97% of the inventory is gone. It's either gone China syndrome, or like you've seen in the explosions, was ejected out of the buildings. This was the fuel pool of reactor 1. And so these are sleazy, loathsome, unspeakable, unforgivable. These criminals. These are terrorists. Not malfeasance, but terrorists. That's the only way you can describe them. They're not. You don't call them desperados. You don't call them scoundrels or pirates or racketeers or fraudsters or swindlers or whatever. These are terrorists. What they're doing is terrorism. And Japan revises Fukushima cleanup plan, delays key steps. 2019 December. So this is allegedly reactor 4 fuel pool down right. Reactor 3 fuel pool is right there. This is official. And they're saying 566 sets of mostly used fuel. Lying just comes so natural for them, don't it? More than 4,700 units of fuel rods remain inside the 3 melter reactors and 2 others that survived the earthquake and the tsunami. So the time of reactor 5 and 6. But as I showed you, reactor 6 at the beginning must have had a meltdown because it was completely pixelated out. So was the stack, and so was the pump house. And I also showed you that the common spent fuel pool was completely pixelated out with no explanations, and that another area in the far end of the site was also heavily pixelated out after the accident, which suggests something else melted down. Just one of these reactors are worse than all nuclear reactor meltdowns in history combined. Just one of these buildings. They pose a high risk because their storage pools are uncovered, and a loss of water in case of another major disaster could cause the fuel rods to melt, releasing massive radiation. Of course, the fuel rods not only melted, it's surreal that because if you tell that same lie from every direction, the majority of people are going to believe the lie, right? So reactor 4, like when you look at this building, there is nothing, there really isn't. Let me do a. So, by the way, let me show this to her over here, right? So that's reactor 4. That's the top part of the reactor. The center is the cover for it, and behind it is the bottom part. Now remember, only 2/3. Now you see a space over there. Now remember, this is the very bottom of the building we're looking at. That's the elevator shaft where this goes all the way up to the top of the building, 190 feet up in the air, 150 feet, 160 feet up in the air. And they lower the cast down through the building. And that's the bottom of the building. Below that is where the trucks would normally back in. But none of this matters. See, this is quite a deceitful picture. Because you see that there, that doesn't belong there. That belongs like 100 feet above there. But to the unsuspecting person who doesn't know any better. Now look at the guts of the building that were blown out. This is the very bottom of the building. This is ground level, say right here. So everything is blown out of the bottom. So there really isn't anything left in the building. Right? There is nothing left in the building. If it wasn't a nuclear meltdown, and this was the building, and you went inside of the building because it was now safe, right? It's not a meltdown. You go in there, you couldn't find a light switch that you can take home and rewire into your shed. You couldn't find no cabinets, no doors. There's no lights. There's going to be no tiles. There'll be no nothing functional. There's nothing you can take there. Even if this wasn't a nuclear meltdown, there's nothing you can take out of this building to bring back and use it in construction of another building, because it's completely gone. And when you look inside of there, you look at all the debris on both sides of it, and then you look up the side of it. Like this is there is nothing left. There is nothing left there. The removal at Unit 1 and 2 after repeated delays is now delayed by up to 10 years out from the initial 2018, with more preparation needed to reduce radiation, clean debris, and other risk. The buildings are melted down. They're completely gone. They're liquefied. There's some left, and you're going to have to clean it up. But they're claiming everything is inside the buildings, which is a complete and utter fabrication, and stops us from dealing with this appropriately, stops us from treating this with the respect that it deserves, stops us from coming up with solutions so it doesn't happen anywhere else. And the whole industry is just a curse. It's a curse on humanity and the 8 million species. TEPCO has emptied the pool at Unit 4, and the fuel pools are at the very top of the building. So, but if you look at the basics of the building in 2012, there is no fuel pools, there is no building, there's nothing left. And so that's the genesis of the law. They got away with it in 2014, pretending they were in the fuel pool of Reactor 4, and so then they went for it. Reactor 3, and now Reactor 1 and 2, they're going to do the same thing. TEPCO has expressed intentions of hiring workers for the decommissioning under Japan's new policy allowing more unskilled foreign laborers. So not nuclear scientists, not nuclear academics, not nuclear companies, nuclear corporations, but unskilled, like blue-collar workers. Okay. Now, what have they done for the years before that? 2013. Workers are tricked to being on the front line. Does that sound like nuclear scientists? 2012. Mentally handicapped are working at Fukushima and are given second-hand paper suits. Second-hand paper suits. They call them radiation suits in the media, but these are paper suits. You can look up the pictures yourself, right? The mentally disabled are working at Fukushima. Homeless are treated like disposable people. 2013. So when they say workers, this is what they're talking about. These are not workers. They don't know what they're doing. They're not educated. They don't have a university. They're not from corporations. They don't have safety meetings in the morning. Don't go near number 3. Georgie boy dropped dead there yesterday. You better wait till the wind shifts northeast and then run over there. No, you can't go near these buildings. These are catastrophic gamma shines. And we're talking about will melt your organs. You're running away, your organs will melt. And this is very visual what I'm going to talk about, but this is what happens. Your organs will start melting. And then you're going to stop, and you're going to squat down, and you're going to pull your pants down, you're going to squat down and try to use the bathroom. It's going to feel like you got diarrhea, but really bad. And what's happening is your organs melted and liquefied, and you're going to excrete that. And then you're going to die right there. And they found people after Hiroshima and Nagasaki in that position where they stopped and squat down and excreted their organs because they melted. And that's nuclear, see? Forbes is despicable, by the way. They're pro-nuclear beyond anything reasonable. This is outrageous, they said. Homeless people are being sold to companies and put to work on Fukushima. Not nuclear scientists, not nuclear academics, not nuclear corporations, not nuclear universities, not nuclear students. And they should send nuclear students there. Hey, you want to work for nuclear industry, get your ass down to Fukushima. If you've done that, then that would be the end of nuclear, right? Because nobody's going to work there. UN officials astounded that the homeless are taken to work in Fukushima ready to die. They're ready to die because you got endless nuclear meltdowns. You got detonations. You threw fuel rods and fuel pools all over the site. Official 311 notebook concerned half of Japan to be covered in nuclear waste. Well, it wasn't a concern. They knew this happened. the speedy models. They've done 5,500 models of the radioactive fallout, and it showed the whole country buried. Now the study, we got the numbers from right across the whole country. It's a nuclear wasteland. So are the sewage. Like we covered stories last night of sewage ash, 38,000 tons in Kanto, Tokyo. They're so radioactive, 12 years later, they still can't get rid of it because it's too radioactive. And so they released infinitely more by burning it because you can't destroy radiation. 60 and older should be prepared to die at Fukushima. So if your coal plant breaks down, your oil plant breaks down, your gas plant breaks down, you don't say 60 and older should be prepared to die. That's only invoked for nuclear. And which, like, on its own merit, means nuclear has no right to exist. We are in so much trouble. Pretending this is not happening is literally the stupidest route we can take. And so I'm here as often as I can. Interviewing Fukushima, a lot of police are dead, but it's not reported. There's over 300 police officers, I think it was 2016, that had been recorded of dying from kidney failure and liver failure. Caused by you know what? Well, because they're guarding the gates into the ghost towns, of all things. When radiation workers die, they're marked as missing. Japan, Dr. Tokyo should no longer be inhabited. You're talking about 36 million people in metropolitan Tokyo. Time is running out. Small modular nuclear reactors point to this is hilarious. Small modular reactors point to a post-Fukushima uranium recovery. I didn't know what to do when I seen that headline. I almost didn't cover the story, and then I was like, oh, you got to cover it, Dana. You can't just turn your back on it. But it's so stupid that somebody would say something like that. Just bear with me. Here we go. I'm getting better at finding the information. So here's the statistics for 2023 on nuclear versus renewables. Nuclear goes backwards, 2024, January 2024 of this year, 3 months ago, less than 3 months ago, 2 months ago. Nuclear goes backwards again, same as the year before, as wind and solar have another major year. So what was the numbers? So 2 large nuclear reactors is about 1.7 gigawatts. It's actually 0.89 gigawatts average. And there's currently 364 gigawatts worldwide of nuclear. Last year, in 12 months, renewable added an additional 507 gigawatts. And a gigawatt is enough to power 1 million homes. So renewable goes backwards. In 2024, that came out for the official statistics. Nuclear went backwards by almost 2 gigawatts, two large nuclear power plants, whereas renewables got an extra 507 gigawatts. So, there is different math equations you can use. So just let me bring up quickly the calculator of nuclear death. 507 gigawatts divided by 0.89 is a typical nuclear power plant. So that's 569 nuclear power plants worth of renewables came online last year. 570. And total of nuclear is 360. So minus 364 gigawatts. So there was an extra 200 nuclear plants worth of renewables came online in 12 months than 80-year history combined current generation of nuclear power. In your face, nuclear. Hey, Kama. Okay. So when you see headlines like this today, like there is no nuclear renaissance. There's a renewable renaissance, which is being held back because the artificial inflation caused by United Nations companies adopting an embargo against gas, oil, and coal from a country, and they can't replace it. And then the carbon taxes today, the numbers started showing up today for Canada. My goodness. In Canada, if you make $100, 48 of it, 48 of it goes to taxes. Now, if you go to the gas station and you take the extra, or 42 I think it was, 42 cents. If you go to the gas station and spend, it was $62, 38, and you go to the gas station and spend the $62 that are left over, you're going to pay another $21 in taxes. So essentially, you took home $41 on every $100 here in Canada, because we just got a new carbon tax of 20%. And so I know people now can't afford to go pick up their children anymore. They can't buy, they were living on 1 or 2 meals a day. Now they're living on a meal every 2 days. The greed is surreal, right? Ex-Prime Minister Suga inspects Fukushima nuclear plant. And the whole industry is completely out of control. It's unbelievable. It's a threat to everything. And if we don't deal with this, then what's the point of being on the planet? How do we look anybody in the eye and not deal with what's going on? How do we pretend this is not happening? How do we justify... My apologies, hang on here. How do we justify not doing nothing? See? I know I can't. I can't come up with a way to justify it. And so I work really hard every day in desperation that the world will make a stand. Because this is Earth's last stand, right? What we're talking about is Earth's last stand. Alrighty, we're just going to call it a night, I think. Let's bring up the poll. Hi, everybody. Does the endless evidence prove that Japan and the terrorist International Atomic Energy Agency faked Fukushima Reactor 4 and Reactor 3 fuel pool recovery, right? And I showed you absurd amount of documentation tonight to quantify that assertion, can't I? Or didn't I? In desperation that the world will come to its senses and make a stand. And that's all you got to do. If we had 100 people telling the story, the nuclear industry will get on its back. It'll stick its legs and arms up in the air and cry and scream and kick in frustration. You got me. That's what's going to happen. Alrighty, so if you make it this far, congratulations. You're amazing. You are amazing. We'll see everybody tomorrow night for another night of absolute madness. This is madness. It's going to take them 10 years to dig out around the common spent fuel pool because they're worried about a landslide. So instead of putting rebar there and just reinforcing it, because everything to do with a nuclear plant is insane. And so that fuel pool melted down and went China syndrome. They want to dig down. It's going to take them 10 years, they figure, to work it out. And so that's the cover story, is they got a landslide. It's the stupidest. And we covered it extensively in the first half after the major introduction. We're going to close the poll down here tonight. We got a wonderful 46 votes. Thank you, everybody. Does endless evidence, and you can go to my playlist. I provide an absurd amount of documentation. Take screenshots of it because you can't trust the industry, folks. Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Bless your hearts, each and every one of you. Have a great night. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you make it this far. I get so few because it's not your fault. Your numbers don't register. We record everything that they're doing, and it's desperation. They put a lot of work into me and the silencing me, but silence me is not going to silence all of you. I made sure that there's enough people out there that this story ain't never going to go away. Have a great night. A great day tomorrow. I see everybody tomorrow night. Hugs for everybody. Take care, folks.